So while I'm down here, I figured I'll go over the basics of these spawn points and timing objects. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple, but I see a lot of people get hung up on them and kind of get weird things going on. If you do not have your spawn objects rotated properly, your car can spawn upside down. It can have a broken suspension. Your pit guy can be on the wrong side of the track. He can be 1,000 feet tall or a little midget, a little tiny guy, that you can barely see. Key things here are that it is scaled at 1. So if you happen to scale this up in object mode, it's fine that it's big. It does not matter. It only cares about the origin point of the object. But if it's big like that, you want to make sure you put Control A and apply scale to bring it back to 1. If there's any kind of scale on that, plus or minus, if you go the other direction and have it in a minus, you can just do weird things and can do a lot of and break how the car spawns on that point. So make sure it is at a 1 scale and not have any scale on it whatsoever. So same kind of theory applies with the other objects. Once you create the object, you do all your scaling, editing, or whatever you want to do in edit mode. Because as I scale this up, it still remains 1 scaled 1 out here. So we don't have to worry about it doing anything funky. The next thing we want to do is the object must be rotated, at least in Blender, on the x-axis of 90 degrees. When we first create a cube, it's going to be, I'm just going to scale it up, we're not going to use it, but you can see Z is up. What we want is we want Z forward, and we want Y up. That is the most important part. Z is the direction the car will be facing when it joins in game. So the first thing you want to do with your first object is come up here to the x-axis and rotate it by 90. And you see all that does is that brings the Z forward. And now all we can do is we can rotate that object, do whatever we want on regular Z axis, global Z, and it'll go and it'll be perfectly fine. It's obviously that has a scale on it, so we'd want to reset that, and then that spawn object would work as long as it is named properly. That is the other key part. So the naming scheme is for the pit objects is AC underscore pit underscore 0 being your first spot. And then your second spot will be 1, and your next spot will be your third spot will be 2. So everything is going to kind of be off a number. So if you have 40 boxes, your final number is going to be 39 on your final box because your first box is 0 and not 1. So that's something to, it kind of throws me for a loop sometimes. I'll be like, oh, I need so many boxes, then I always screw up the number. Anyway, so then your start spots, that's going to be AC underscore start underscore 0 being your first spot. It is a good idea with AC, with its illustrious AI, will be to stagger your pit spots. If you do not stagger your pit spots, they're going to go into turn 1 side by side, and that's obviously never really a good thing with AC's AI. So you want to encourage them to kind of get into single file as soon as possible to get so they start going fast or as fast as they can, which is never really that fast. But putting a little stagger in the pit spawn spots will help the AI, especially on tight circuits, kind of get in line and not be a total disaster into turn 1. So yeah, you just kind of then you would just select your 2 spots, duplicate, go along the local Z. You hit Z twice. The second time we'll put it on local Z, and just keep on going down the line. And also generally, um, your separation between the spots. You like to try to be somewhere in the 35 to 40 foot range. Um, Anything closer, and then you get the illustrious start where the cars just kind of are they burn out for a second and then they just stop because they're too close to each other. So you want to put at least 35 to 40 feet between each spot so the cars do not end up so close to each other so they don't basically park themselves right after the race starts. So that's kind of a key part of the race start spawn spots. The pit spots do not matter how close they are. You can bunch these babies up as close as you want because, as we all know with AC, the pit lane is ghosted. They do not have contact with each other. So you can, if you got a small pit lane and you want to get 32 spots in it for league racing or whatever, you can pack them in. You can also come in here and stick some pits objects out in the middle of pit lane. Who cares? You can drive through them. The point is to just get the extra pit spots into the game, so you can have as more players playing over. Like say, Zandvoort by default only has 18, so obviously want to add more. You can just pack them in double wide. Some of my tracks like Bridgehampton, pit lane has by default it's only set 24, but in the model there's actually 42. I think I added or 40 on the left side of pit lane. I have a whole another row of pit spots that would be like over against the left side wall for league use. So the next pit things that are important is the timing spots. Here I only have two because it's a small track. There's really not a need for three sectors. You could if you want, but I didn't bother. You can have more than three. You can have four sectors, but the basic UI of AC inside the main game only really shows the three. But it will work with four. Riverside long layout actually has four to avoid cutting, but some people complain that S-Tracker, I think S-Tracker and the default UI do not really show the fourth sector. So if you add up your sector times, they're not going to complete or add up to a lap time because they're not. It's missing one basically, but AC still times it correctly. So the way these work, same situation. These must be scaled as one. Um, Height doesn't seem to matter. They can be up in Never Never Land. I've had it work either way. But normally you tend to try to keep it in the ballpark. Same thing with the spawn parts. They can be right on the ground, and it shouldn't be a problem. So honestly don't know if this is required, but I've always done it this way. I've always made sure. I'm pretty sure still has to be forward, and I'm pretty sure X has to cross the racing surface. It may or may not be true. It may just be automatically between the two origin points, but I've always set it up this way, similar to the spawn points, that X crosses the track, Z goes forward. So if you were to move them, you would see that the X-axis is at the start finish line. And also key point is to make sure your spawn parts are on the outside of your walls, that you cannot in any way drive around them. Because if you drive around them, if your car can somehow go to one side or the other of them and not between them, your lap is completely not counted until you come around and cross this point again. So the naming scheme for these is AC underscore time underscore zero underscore left and then zero underscore right. Then you come over here, and then your next sector is going to be one underscore left and one underscore right. And then obviously your next one's going to, if you had a third sector, would be two underscore left underscore right. So again, your numbers don't add up to three because you're going to start with zero. But again, you can have more than three things, three sectors if you wanted. Um, so that's the basics of setting up your spawn points. There is a hot lap one. Don't remember the naming scheme of it. I think it's like AC underscore hot lap underscore zero. I'd have to double check. I don't have a file handy right now that has the naming of that. And that's basically just for when you go to hot lap mode. If you don't have the hot lap point, your car will just fall through the track at the 0 point of the thing, and then once it resets the pit, you'll be thrown to pit lane. But yeah, that's the only other kind of spawn point that matters. And that's that's it. And to get it in game, the basics that you need are one pit stall and one start stall. You do not technically need these timing points. Your lap time will just go into infinity and never stop. But the basic spawn points that are required is one pit stall, yeah, one start stall, and that's it. You do not need anything else. But yeah, it just shows you the, all the ones that I made for this track. So yeah, that's the basics of that, and then we'll move on. So now I'll go over the basic settings to export to the proper FBX format that the AC editor will like. But first, no matter what we do, we have to make sure that every object that we export has some sort of material applied. If you do not, it will yell at you when you bring it in. So, or try to bring it into the editor. So basically, what I like to do, anything physics related or spawn related, I just make a PHY material. It's not going to have anything assigned other than a basic little gray texture. It's not going to have anything important. It's just a simple material that every object should have. So similar situation using linked objects. These are already linked, but say I wanted to change this just for these are just other materials that are in the scene from other objects I've imported. Uh, but say everything else is PHY, we're going to link materials. So now everybody should change. Oh, I screwed that up. Hold on. This is where the brain farts come in. I had the wrong thing selected. So this is your host object. I changed that. Link materials. So now everybody will have people. I'll change this back to PHY and link my materials back, and then everybody's back to PHY. So that's a simple process to get every object, and that's why it's important to use layers, so that way you can just select everything in a scene instead of having to like, all right, I gotta select these guys and select these guys. You just kind of select all, and you're done. So yeah, make sure everything is just one-to-one scale. Nothing's got any scale on it. Everything's got a material assigned to it. So then if we go to File, Export, FBX. 7.4 binary is what you're going to want to be on. I have a preset made for my basics export settings. I only ever export the mesh. I don't do, you can have empties if you want. Some people make their spawn points empties, but I just use a mesh and use a box. Um, I also use 0.01 scale on the export. I don't change any other settings other than I think we change Z forward, Y up. I don't quite remember if that's default or not, but it's what you want is negative Z forward and Y up. There is a way to have this 1.0, and I think you change this to FBX all, and maybe click this check mark here. I can't quite remember, but these are my settings and what I've basically used for all my tracks so far. It's never been a problem. I think it's the same for 2.8. I think this exporter is pretty similar. I don't think much has changed. So here we are in the track folder. I like to keep my spawn points on a separate FBX/KN5 file. You can bake it into the main file, but I don't particularly like doing that for my timing and spawn objects. And I say this is a basic way to show you how to set up your track to have multiple KN5s, which is kind of important. So these are your basic settings. Go to export, and that's it. So now those files are sitting in the FBX format, waiting for you to bring it into the editor, which I'll do next. So here's the editor, and we're going to open up our spawn FBX file. It's waiting for us that we just made. So we're going to come in here and you can see everything's kind of looks a little weird. You're going to click on one of them, doesn't matter which one. And we only have one material assigned here. And you can see it says null and null here. So there's no texture map assigned. So we want to assign something. It doesn't have to be anything important. So by default, the editor makes a null image. So this is kind of made, if you have no textures at all, the first time you open up the KS editor or an FBX file with it'll throw this null file in there. So that's what I just like to use because it's always going to be there. It's a small little tiny 64 by 64 file. Nothing special, but that's all we need. Now see that's in green. You want to make sure you're using a DDS file. You can use a PNG file just for some experimentation if it's an easier format. But as far as a final format to have for tracks anyway, you're going to want to stick to have all your textures to be DDS files just because of memory allocation goes through the roof sometimes when you use lots and lots of PNG or even JPEG files. It's just a bad idea to use anything but a DDS in on tracks. So You can leave these alone. It doesn't matter. These objects will not be drawn in scene. They're automatically hidden. But if you want them to look halfway decent, you just throw some basic values in there. So then that's going to make them so they're not all black and shiny and stuff. Um, KS per pixel is fine. That's your basic shader. And then so we want to save persistence. So what that does is that creates a little FBX, a little INI file for this SBX file. So the next time I'm going to restart the editor and open it up, the next time we load it up, the settings that we just set will be saved as point 3 and point 3, and also what texture is assigned. That is all saved in the persistence file. So that is the most important part of the editor, and those material names. If I go inside the Blender and change this PHY to a different name, it's gonna basically break the persistence file, and all this stuff will be back to default, and I'll have to reset it again. Not a big deal if that's what you would tend to do, but don't be surprised if that happens if you change the name of the material. Object name also matters, but is for certain things. Like if you're going to want to have it to cast shadow or be transparent, that's a whole other thing. We'll get into more detail with that when we do more work in the editor. But this is just the basics of getting an FBX in the editor and then out of the editor. So everything is set. We got a material set. We got a DDS file in there, and then we just want to save track and come back to our main folder, and we already have a KN5 file here, so I'm just going to save over it, and that's fine. This is all happy. If you don't have a texture assigned, it will yell at you saying you don't have it. If anything's in red here, it won't allow you to save it. So that's just the basics of getting a basic FBX file inside the game. So now I'm gonna bring in our track FBX, and I'll show you some basics of the materials with that. So this is the track model. You can see it's got everything kind of set up in here. Just this is all roughed in. I'll be messing with this later, and I'll probably go over more of how to create these texture maps in a later video when we start getting into like final setting these things up. This is just mainly to rough it in, get it in game, borrow a texture from another track, whatever. Doesn't even have to have any real basic. It could be just a basic KS per pixel shader. Doesn't have to be anything special. You just want to get it in game and go. You can see the walls here are just your basic. Actually, I have a normal map assigned just because I had it already from my other track project, and then I'm using the Fresnel shader for the road. There's a couple tutorials about this on Race Department that I've made. And again, we'll go over this more in detail, but really to get this baby in game, all you need to get is to set this, say, to KS per pixel, throw a basic texture map on it, and that'll work just fine, at least for initial getting it into game. You're not concerned about every little detail at this point. So, yeah, so we got our lines in here. For line objects, you want to come in here and turn off cast shadow. I'm using, let me restart and get my shader settings back so you can see how they match. But I use, in this particular case, I'm not using alpha channel based textures for the lines. I'm using the same kind of road shader and the way it matches. And again, we'll go over that more in detail. But so I'm not going to have this set as transparent because this is not based on alpha channel. This is based on using the same shader. It's still floating above the tracks ever so slightly. You can see the edge if you look very closely, and the normal map doesn't quite line up, but the detail maps lines up. But it gives it that basic, spray paint look with the pebbles coming through the paint. And we'll go over that in the future. I just wanted to basically show you that now, and we got our concrete setup for our road. That's also using the same basic shader. And again, you don't need any of this advanced stuff right now. You just need basic materials that'll get you in game. And obviously, one thing I forgot to mention for road, it's pretty commonly known for your road to work to be physical. needs to be have a number in front of it and be with and say road or whatever the name of the surface is. Generally I use O1 road. It could be O2 road. It can be 2 road, 1 road. Doesn't matter. I've just always done odd one road, and anything after it does not matter. But any object that has a a number in front of it plus the name of the key for the surface will become physical. For now, everything here is road. I don't have pit lane. Actually, these are actually named completely wrong. I have to go. I'd have to right now. You would fall through the track if you went if I were to say this in game. Uh, so yeah, this is named incorrectly, but this is correct as O1 road. So make sure your object is named properly here as O1 road, like coming here. This is incorrect, so I would just do O1 road, and that would be drivable if I export that. And that would be it. So then we go to File, Saves KN5, and that would bring us to a track that we could load up and put in game. The basic folder structure I'll bring over here. Is you don't want an AI line. If you copy a folder structure from another track, you want to delete any AI line that's in there because it will cause the game to crash. Data-wise, you just need a basic. You don't want to make sure you want to make sure you don't have audio sources. I threw a one at the end of these files, so it kind of negates them. But you can come in here and delete them. You don't need them. They will cause you to crash because you don't have the object names that those INI files look for and will potentially cause it to crash. You can ignore the groove line thing, that's from another app, and you can ignore the texture file in here. It's also something I was experimenting with. Cameras, don't really care about. Crew, it's a basic thing that tells you which side the crew is on. And lighting, map, all this stuff doesn't really matter too much. Overlays we don't care about right now. Surfaces is really the key thing that we care about. Um, we want to make sure we have a road surface in there. You set your friction to whatever you want it to be. Um, and say we'll go more advanced, to go into more detail about this later on when we start adding more surfaces. But the basics are these are your keys. So if you did O1 pits, that would be your pits. O1 sand, that would be your sand. O1 curb, that would be your curb. O1 paddock, and again, each key, each section or grass gets its own values and friction values and stuff. So, but we'll go into more in detail with that when we start dealing with physics messages and stuff. So that's your basics folder structure. Textures folder, that's when you required strictly for the editor. When you release your track, you're going to want to make sure you don't include your texture folder. This is strictly for the editor. So what happens is the editor opens up these FBX file, and then when you save the KN5 file, it bakes the textures and the FBX into this one KN5 file. So it's all kind of combined. So once that's all said and done, you do not need this texture file for it to work in game. So then out here, map is automatically generated if you have an AI line, and we'll get into that much later as far as creating that. That will be auto-generated by the AI line. For now, you can delete it, or it'll recreate it when you load it, and it may be blank or black or whatever, but you don't care about that so much right now. But the other main thing we care about here is the models file. These two guys are your persistence files, by the way. These are where your settings are kept for when you load up your FBX file. You do not necessarily want to mess with them, but you can see these are all your values for your shaders held in there. But anyway, coming back to the models file, you can see I got an extra file in here. It doesn't matter if you have extra ones, really. It may throw an error in the log, but it's not that big of a deal. Um, but we'll get to this. We're not to this point yet of having a physical mesh, separate physical mesh. We're still driving off of our main mesh, which is fine for now. But we have our main model, which is our main KN5 file, and then we have our spawn point. So that will tell AC when it loads up that it's going to it's going to look for these files. If it doesn't find it, whatever, it's not a big deal. But it's going to look for these KN5 files and load it in game. So that's the key thing about setting up and having multiple KN5 files. Having multiple KN5 files will save your butt some along the way as your track gets more and more detailed. your export times will get longer, and your import times into the editor will get longer. So the more you segregate the track out into separate pieces, will save you, especially when you're dealing with physics. That way you're only kind of exporting the physics mesh each time you do a test, and not having to export every single model every single time. But say we'll go into more detail about the physics mesh when we start actually making a high res road and adding possibly a little bit of noise into the surface. But we want to get this in game first, excuse me, and we will see how it drives. So here we are in game, and so this is just a basic test run. I showed a preview video. I didn't have the lines in there the other day when I made the preview video, but it's just to take us a little bit time around the track, test out how everything kind of feels. Overall, this one doesn't feel too bad. I'll use real head motion with this, so you'll see the kind of the screen. You'll see the movement of the car a little better than if it was fixed. But you can see it's not too rough. It's got some nice undulations as you go down the straightaway and into the turns. This data was pretty dense, so it picked up quite a bit of that detail. If your data's not quite that dense, you may have to we'll have to add in some noise later, and I'll go through that process. Even if I don't end up using it for this track, I'll show you at least the basics of it in one of the later upcoming episodes. But yeah, you just want to kind of get it in game, see how it feels, test your all your surfaces. Like we'll go down pit lane here. I say it's not defined as a pit lane yet, so it's not gonna have a speed limit or anything, but see how it feels. It's a little rougher than the track, which is sometimes to be expected because pit lane may not be as perfectly smooth as the track. But so yeah, not too bad. And go drive around your apron and see how everything is. Make sure you got no massive holes or bumps or anything, and just kind of feel it out. See how it drives, and tires are a little on the cold side. You probably don't get to see much because I run triple screens, so the capture is only capturing the center screen, so you don't get to see what I get to see. I can kind of see through the corner a little better because I can look through my left screen, but oh, yeah, so the tires are a little cold. Setup is not quite there at this point, but yeah, it's always nice to get your creation kind of in game and drive it for the first time, see how it feels, and see what it might need. You say it may be too smooth, it may be too bumpy. If it's too bumpy, you'll have to go back and kind of either run some corrective smooth on your created mesh, or run more corrective smooth on the LiDAR data, which will give you more of a smooth feeling of the track. But if it feels good, you can kind of leave it as is, and if you want to add more noise, again, we'll go over that a little bit in further episodes. But this is just a point to get it in game, see what it feels like, see how to drive the track. Kind of maybe you can compare it to some onboard videos at this point. See how accurate it is, see if anything needs attention. But yeah, that's the basic steps of, at this point, going from LiDAR data to getting something in-game that you can drive around. And it's always kind of a fun feeling, nice feeling to drive something for the first time. But yeah, we'll go into more detail to kind of get your track, more aspects of track building, and hopefully cover just about every aspect from here on out till this little oval track is completely finished. So I'll probably do a couple more episodes in the next few weeks, and then the month of December, my goal is to try to finish Road America. Try to get as much done through the month of December with that. So I'll take a break from doing the videos and I'm gonna go to town. If there's anything I do on Road America that applies to a video, maybe I'll make a note of it and make a video of it. But my goal is to get that finished or at least close to finished, and maybe get something released by the end of the year for Road America and get that on. Then I'll continue with this project after the new year. And I got a bunch of new projects I want to do in this coming year that I'm excited about. But yeah, so hopefully we'll see you in the next few episodes in the next few weeks. All right.